Richard Washington flinched as ice-cold water cascaded down his head. Christine's contemptuous smile burned deeper than the humiliation. The 61-year-old black veteran maintained his composure, a discipline learned from decades of service. She had no idea whose career she had just destroyed. Richard Washington wasn't just any ordinary volunteer at Mercy General Hospital. Before donning the simple blue volunteer vest, he had served 30 years as a distinguished Navy Corpsman, rising to the rank of Master Chief. His hands, now gently guiding patients through hospital corridors, had once performed emergency surgeries under enemy fire in Iraq and Afghanistan. During his military career, Richard had saved hundreds of lives, earning a Silver Star for running through active combat to rescue 3 wounded Marines. His quick thinking and exceptional medical skills made him a legend among his unit. Even generals sought his advice on field medicine protocols. After retiring from active duty, Richard channeled his passion for healthcare into philanthropic work, eventually becoming one of the city's most respected medical administrators. His military precision and unwavering commitment to excellence led to his appointment as chairman of the board for the entire Mercy healthcare system, overseeing 5 hospitals across the metropolitan area. Despite his position of power, Richard remained humble. His military background taught him that true leadership meant understanding the experiences of those serving on the front lines. When concerning reports about staff treatment at Mercy General reached him, Richard made a decision that reflected his Marine Corps training. He would gather intelligence personally. Without informing anyone except the hospital CEO, Richard created a cover identity as a regular volunteer, complete with a slightly modified appearance. Glasses, a trimmed beard, and casual clothes that concealed the commanding presence he typically projected. The mission was clear: observe, document, and evaluate how staff were truly treated when they thought no one important was watching. Richard's first day as Rick, a new hospital volunteer, was eye-opening. Wearing the standard issue blue vest, he reported to the volunteer coordinator, who hastily handed him a badge and directed him to transport patients between departments. While pushing an elderly patient's wheelchair toward radiology, Richard encountered Christine Miller, the administrative manager. She briskly walked past, nearly colliding with the wheelchair. "Watch where you're going," she snapped without breaking stride. Richard maintained his composure, softly replying, "I apologize, ma'am." The patient in the wheelchair sighed. "Don't take it personally. She treats everyone like that." Throughout that first day, Richard observed patterns that troubled his military-trained eye. Senior staff spoke condescendingly to nurses. Administrators walked past struggling orderlies without offering assistance. The hierarchy was rigid, but non-productive, respect-based way he'd experienced in the Marines. At the volunteer break room, Richard sat quietly, listening to others' experiences. "Been here 3 months," said Miguel, a young volunteer. "The doctors are mostly decent. But those administrators? They look through you like you're invisible." Richard nodded, taking mental notes. The environment reminded him of toxic leadership he'd seen dismantle effective military units, where rank became a weapon rather than a responsibility. This wasn't the hospital system he thought he was overseeing. As days passed, Richard's concerns deepened. The hospital's public face, compassionate care and teamwork displayed in brochures, contrasted sharply with its daily reality. Using his military observational training, Richard documented numerous incidents that revealed a troubling pattern. Christine Miller emerged as the most problematic leader. Her management style consisted primarily of intimidation. Richard watched her reduce a young nurse to tears over a minor charting error, then immediately switched to a syrupy voice when a doctor approached. One Tuesday morning, Richard was organizing supplies in the emergency department when he overheard Christine berating a volunteer named Maria, a college student aspiring to become a doctor. "If you can't properly stock these cabinets, how do you expect to handle medical school?" Christine's voice dripped with disdain. "Some people just aren't cut out for healthcare. Maybe reconsider your career plans." Maria's hands trembled as she continued working, eyes downcast. Richard's military instincts, "Protect your team," almost made him intervene, but he reminded himself that gathering complete intelligence was crucial. Later that week, Richard witnessed Derek Phillips, the associate director, deliberately creating extra work for support staff. When the cafeteria ran out of his preferred sandwich, Derek demanded a complete inventory of food supplies to ensure this incompetence doesn't happen again, assigning the 4-hour task to staff already working overtime. Richard attempted to address these issues through proper channels, submitting his observations to human resources through the anonymous employee feedback system. When nothing changed, he approached Kara Mitchell, the HR director, as a concerned volunteer. Her dismissive response, "Administrative matters are handled at appropriate levels," told Richard everything he needed to know about institutional complicity. In his military career, Richard had learned that poor treatment of subordinates never remained isolated. It inevitably compromised the entire mission. At Mercy General, that mission was patient care. Using a small notebook, Richard began documenting times, dates, witnesses, and exact quotes, building his case methodically. The confrontation that would change everything occurred on Richard's third week undercover. He was helping transport medical supplies when he once again encountered Maria struggling with a heavy cart of linens outside the surgical wing. Christine approached, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "Why is this cart blocking the hallway?" Christine demanded, despite the cart being properly positioned against the wall. "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller," Maria replied softly. "I was just about to..." "About to what? Create a fire hazard? Do you understand what could happen if we needed to evacuate patients?" Christine's voice grew louder, attracting attention from passing staff who quickly lowered their eyes and hurried past. Richard, drawing on his military training about when to intervene in escalating situations, stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "I can help move this cart wherever it needs to go." Christine swiveled toward him, eyes narrowing. "And who asked for your input?" "Another volunteer who doesn't understand proper protocols." "The cart is properly positioned according to hospital safety guidelines," Richard stated firmly but respectfully, the same tone he'd used with agitated soldiers in combat zones. "I was a medical professional for 30 years before volunteering here." Christine's face flushed with anger at being challenged. 30 years? And now you're just a volunteer? Clearly not a very successful career. She looked him up and down, taking in his age and race. "People like you should know your place here." Several nurses and a doctor had paused nearby, watching uncomfortably. Maria looked mortified. "In healthcare, every role deserves respect," Richard replied evenly. "That's how effective teams function." Christine reached for a cup of ice water, sitting on the nurse's station counter. With deliberate slowness, she stepped closer. "Let me explain your position more clearly," she said, and before anyone could react, she tipped the cup, pouring the ice-cold water directly onto Richard's head. Gasps echoed through the hallway. Water streamed down Richard's face and soaked his volunteer vest. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Drawing on decades of military discipline, Richard remained perfectly still, his dignity intact despite the water dripping from his chin. His eyes, however, held something that made Christine step back. Not anger, but a calm certainty that justice would come. "Now," Christine smirked, regaining her composure, "clean this up before someone slips." That's what volunteers are for, isn't it? The water incident marked a turning point in Richard's investigation. While he maintained his cover, hospital staff now viewed him with a mixture of sympathy and respect for how he'd handled Christine's humiliation. This new status gave him access to more concerning behaviors throughout the hospital hierarchy. Derek Phillips, the associate director, became Richard's next focus. Unlike Christine's explosive temper, Derek employed calculated indifference as his weapon of choice. Richard observed him deliberately assigning menial, repetitive tasks to the same staff members, particularly minorities and older employees. One afternoon, Derek approached Richard in the supply room. "You're the volunteer Christine had that interaction with, correct?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Since you have so much medical experience, I have a special assignment for you." The special assignment involved reorganizing an entire storage closet of expired forms, a pointless task designed solely to establish dominance. Richard completed it meticulously, then was immediately tasked with doing it again, because the alphabetization isn't quite right. While methodically resorting the already sorted files, Richard's mind flashed back to his military service. He remembered a battlefield hospital in Fallujah, where rank disappeared in the desperate rush to save lives. Surgeons passed instruments to anyone with free hands. Generals carried stretchers alongside privates. The contrast with Mercy General's rigid hierarchy couldn't be starker. After completing the task a second time, Derek inspected Richard's work with theatrical thoroughness. Still not quite right. Maybe the problem is that volunteers like you simply lack attention to detail. Do it again. Richard noticed a young black orderly watching nervously from the doorway, clearly having experienced similar treatment. The orderly quickly averted his eyes when Derek turned around. "Yes, sir," Richard replied calmly, the same response he'd given to unreasonable orders during his decades in uniform. But unlike those military challenges that built resilience, Derek's tactics served no purpose except degradation. Richard added detailed notes about this incident to his growing documentation. After witnessing 3 more incidents involving different staff members, Richard decided to formally test the hospital's reporting system. He scheduled a meeting with Karen Mitchell, the Human Resources Director, without revealing his true identity. Karen's office projected professionalism, degrees prominently displayed, a bookshelf of HR manuals, and motivational posters about teamwork adorning the walls. The superficial display of values made Richard think of military commanders who recited leadership principles they never practiced. "How can I help you?" Karen asked, barely looking up from her computer. "I'd like to report several incidents of workplace harassment I've witnessed," Richard explained, describing Christine's behavior toward Maria and his own experience with the water incident. Karen sighed, finally meeting his eyes with obvious impatience. "Mr. Washington, is it? You're new here, so let me explain how things work. Administrative staff have extremely stressful jobs managing this hospital. Sometimes their communication style might seem direct to volunteers. Pouring water on someone's head goes beyond direct communication," Richard noted calmly. Karen's expression hardened. "That sounds like an exaggeration. Christine Miller is a value manager with an excellent record of efficiency." "There were at least 6 witnesses," Richard persisted. "Look," Karen leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Volunteers are appreciated, but you need to understand your place in the hospital hierarchy. If you find the environment challenging, perhaps volunteering elsewhere would be better for everyone." Richard left the office with absolute clarity. The problem wasn't just individual bad actors. The entire leadership culture at Mercy General had become corroded. His military experience taught him that when official channels fail, sometimes you need to take direct action to protect your unit. 2 days later, Richard learned that the hospital board, his board, will be making a surprise inspection visit to evaluate recent renovations. The executive floor buzzed with activity as administrative staff prepared presentations and ensured everything appeared perfect. Richard was pushing a cart of patient education materials when he encountered Veronica Winters, the hospital's vice president of operations, directing staff in the main conference room. She paused mid-sentence when she noticed him. "Who authorized you to be on this floor?" Veronica demanded, striding toward him. "This area is restricted today. I was asked to deliver these materials to the education department," Richard explained calmly. "Well, you've clearly taken a wrong turn. Executive offices are not for volunteers," she replied coldly. "Especially today when we have the board chairman visiting." The irony wasn't lost on Richard. Several administrative staff had gathered, watching the interaction with tense expressions. "I understand the chairman is visiting," Richard replied. "I'm just completing my assigned task." Something in his confident response triggered Veronica's anger. "Your assignment is whatever we tell you it is. The problem with volunteers like you is you forget that you're here at our pleasure." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "People like you should be grateful we even allow you to volunteer. Your generation and your kind aren't exactly what we showcase to hospital donors." A stunned silence fell over the gathering staff. The combined age and racial bias in her statement was unmistakable. Christine Miller, standing nearby, smirked. "That's the one I told you about. Veronica thinks his military background makes him special." Veronica scoffed. "Military? Please. Probably just a cook or janitor. Security can escort him out." Richard stood perfectly still. the military bearing he'd temporarily subdued, now fully visible in his posture. The moment had arrived. "Before security arrives," he said quietly, "I think we should clarify exactly who I am." The air in the executive hallway grew electric with tension. Richard slowly removed his volunteer badge, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather wallet. With deliberate movements, he opened it to reveal the hospital board identification card bearing his full title: Richard Washington, chairman of the board, Mercy Healthcare System. "Perhaps introductions are in order," Richard said, his voice now carrying the natural authority he'd been concealing for weeks. "I am not just some volunteer." The transformation was immediate and stunning. Gone was the deferential posture and accommodating tone, replaced by the commanding presence of a man who had led Marines through combat and medical teams through crises. Even his stance changed, revealing the military baron that had become second nature over 30 years of service. The color drained from Veronica's face. Christine took an involuntary step backward, bumping into the wall behind her. Around them, staff members stared in shocked silence, some with barely concealed satisfaction. "For the past 3 weeks," Richard continued calmly, "I have been conducting a personal evaluation of our hospital operations, specifically focused on how leadership treats staff at all levels." He turned to address a wider audience as more people gathered, drawn by the commotion. "As a military medical officer, I learned that how you treat your support personnel directly impacts mission success. In hospitals, that mission is patient care." Richard removed a small notebook from his pocket. "I have documented 47 specific incidents of abusive behavior, discrimination, and misuse of authority. This includes, Ms. Miller, your assault when you poured water on me, witnessed by 6 staff members who have provided written statements." Derek Phillips, who had just arrived, stood frozen in the doorway. "My military career taught me that leadership isn't about privilege. It's about responsibility," Richard stated. "And today, we're going to address how dramatically that principle has been violated at Mercy General." The emergency board meeting convened that afternoon was unlike any in Mercy Healthcare's history. Richard presented his findings methodically, with the precision of a military briefing. Security footage, witness statements, and his detailed documentation left no room for denial. Effective immediately, Richard announced, Christine Miller, Derek Phillips, and Veronica Winters are terminated from their positions. Karen Mitchell will be reassigned pending review. Within hours, the hospital buzzed with the news. Richard didn't stop at removals, however. Drawing on his military experience in rebuilding medical units, he outlined a comprehensive restructuring plan. At Mercy Healthcare, we will implement a servant leadership model based on military medical teams. Leaders exist to support frontline staff, not the reverse. Performance evaluations will measure how managers improve their team's effectiveness and well-being. For staff who had suffered under toxic leadership for years, Richard's actions represented more than justice. They offer hope that institutions could actually change when principled leaders took decisive action. 1 year later, Mercy General's transformation was remarkable. Staff turnover dropped 60%, patient satisfaction soared, and the hospital became a national model for organizational culture. Richard often shares a philosophy. In both battlefield medicine and hospital care, respect for every team member isn't just morally right, it's essential for mission success. The loudest lessons from my military career weren't about rank, but about human dignity. This story reminds us that institutions only change when brave individuals stand against injustice. Richard's military discipline gave him strength to endure humiliation to achieve a greater purpose, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. What acts of disrespect have you witnessed in workplaces? How did leadership respond? Your stories matter in our collective journey toward more respectful environments. Comment your experiences below. And if you respect those fighting for workplace dignity, share this video to inspire others. Subscribe for more stories of courage and justice in unexpected places.